Hello and welcome back on my channel. Glad you found your way back here. Today we're gonna talk about the Beatles, because the only association I had with the Beatles is four guys from the UK with a bowl cut who look kinda goofy, some British folk, but they seem to be very important in pop culture. So today we're going to ask the question, why should we care about the Beatles? To find that out, I'm gonna look at the discography, so the albums. I'm gonna look at movies, the history, basically every piece of information I can find on the internet, and I'm gonna take you along with me to further my understanding of the relevance of the Beatles. So let's get right into it. So with everything that lies in the past, let's start by looking at the history of the band. In July 1957, Paul McCartney and John Lennon meet each other. Lennon likes how McCartney plays the guitar and invites him to his then band, The Quarrymen. A year later, they are joined by George Harrison, another guitarist, and then they have a drummer and I think another singer who will not be part of the Beatles later on. They play in every pub that is available that takes them in Liverpool. And in 1960, they even get the chance to tour in Hamburg, Germany, in the red light district of Hamburg, and they play like hundreds of shows there. They do that for a while. Later they get picked up to be the backing band of another singer, like a studio band, to record with him. And eventually on December 10th, 1961, they get picked up by a new manager, Brian Epstein, who will be very important to the future of the band. He teaches them how to talk with the public, how to deal with public relations. He dresses them up and gives them a new image. So the more conservative media publishes them as well and gives them a stage to stand on. But the Beatles are not yet assembled, even though Brian Epstein, who is called the fifth Beatle sometimes, is there. They're still missing a drummer. So they get a audition in Abbey Road Studios in 1962, and they passed the audition after failing many other auditions. But the guy who takes the audition likes everyone except for the drummer, who is not the Beatles drummer, but the guy from the Quarrymen. McCartney, Harrison, and Lennon decide to pick up Ringo Starr. They played with him before when they didn't have a drummer and needed someone to play the drums. They called up Ringo Starr, and at this point they were like, we had some good times with that guy and he can play the drums pretty well, so why not join us? So we have them all assembled. In September 1962, they record their first single, Love Me Do, which instantly charts. It's a big hit in the UK. It's a big hit in the US. And the following year, in February 1963, they released their first album, Please Please Me, which is a great success instantly in the UK and in the US. And from this point on, the whole career unfolds. But I don't really think we have to look at every single, or I don't really want to look at every single release there is, every single album there is, or how the release went. And after all, they're a band, so let's get into the music. The Beatles were active for 8 years in total, and they made 12 or 13 albums. Really depends on how you look at it. Usually people say it's 12. I'm gonna summarize them in eras so you can have a better overview, so I can have a better overview to really see their trajectory. Quick disclaimer, of course, this is just my personal things, my personal takes on the music, but if you have special takes or like special memories regarding listening to the music, comment down below, much appreciated. Phase number 1, boy band era, from 1963 to 1965. So the first 5 albums by the Beatles can be summarized under the boy band era. We have Please Please Me with the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, Beatles for Sale, and Help. They are all pretty tame and straightforward, to be honest. It's like a rock, pop, mercy beat type thing. Hits the nerve of the times, I think, of the 60s. Main themes are dancing, going out, and then the push and pull of teen relationships. So yeah, that was kind of shallow, I guess, for me. I can see that they were popular at that time and that it really fit the time. What stood out to me were some toxic songs, some toxic hymns. So they have some songs where it's about a partner, mainly the boyfriend, not really being able to deal with the freedom of their female partner, which was pretty funny to me, because all the albums are like their first single was Love Me Do, and then the album is called Please Please Me, and it's all very cute and dancey, and you fill my heart up, and I'm so joyous when I'm with you. And then they have other songs where it's like, oh, you better not talk to that man again. Nah, you can't do that. You broke my heart because you are not available 24/7. Which is a funny switch up to me. I had to chuckle to myself a couple of times listening to these albums. Examples for the toxic songs are Not a Second Time, I'll Cry Instead, and Can't Do That. So if you want to listen to those, go ahead. Next era, Phase 2. Getting Rowdy, 1965 to 1966. So now we're getting into a more experimental era and where it really gets interesting with the Beatles. So we have the albums Rubber Soul and Revolver. At this time, the Beatles discover weed for themselves and like more experimental ways of living and looking at things. You can really hear that in the albums, and it's very welcomed after the boy band era. These albums are still pretty straightforward, but you can hear them experimenting and trying to get into other sounds and other structures. Their songwriting ability starts to flourish because in the first era they do a lot of covers, but here they really start to make music that comes from them and like write lyrics that come from them, and which will get better over time, as we will discover later on. Just the way, for example, Rubber Soul starts off with Taxman, very loose count in by Ringo Starr, and then somebody coughing into the mic, which is such a contrast to the squeaky clean image they have in the boy band era. And the song Nowhere Man on Rubber Soul is a taste of the abstract, character-driven music and lyrics they're gonna do later, like the storytelling. Of course, in this era we still have some toxic tracks, but this time around it seems more like satire, looking back at their songs they did before. So they have Run For Your Life, which is very extreme. Just listen to it yourself and you know what I mean. Phase number 3. Sex, Drugs, and Sitars, 1967. So now we arrive at the universe the Beatles looked for by experimenting in the phase before. We have Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Magical Mystery Tour, which are very interesting. So now the albums have an overarching theme, very quirky, druggy, weird vibe, very colorful, not taking yourself too serious. Maybe they got into some other drugs at this point. They're getting more experimental for sure. They use classical arrangements with big orchestras. They use Sitars, so more oriental. The drums get expanded, so it's not just the classical drum kit, but like different drums, which expand their sound a lot. The abstract character-driven storytelling gets more fleshed out, which is nice. Overall, because they have this druggy, weird vibe, finding a structure is kind of hard, and it can be kind of tiring listening to it. At some points, I was really tired of it. But I mean, I think you just have to be in the right mindset for it. Even though this era is kind of wacky, we have some very memorable melodies and songs that we still know. When I'm 64 and All You Need Is Love, See the Light of Day during this era. So I guess thank you to drugs and experimentation for that. Phase 4, self-titled, The White Album, 1968. So now we arrive at the self-titled album. It's a double album, the only one they ever did, which is known as The White Album. And this is where we get into rock territory as we know it today. Very lengthy, of course. It's 30 songs and a runtime of 93 minutes. During the course of making this album, every member contributed to some song. Good sign of how the band worked together and how everyone was very creative in the band. There are silly and recognizable tracks like Opla Di, Opla Da. The energy goes a bit more up on songs like Helter Skelter, and overall they have some songs that just sound like matured versions of everything that happened up until this point. Getting a little more strict, I would say, than the Sgt. Pepper's era. They even have like a little hint of a musician they very like, Buddy Holly, with the track Honey Pie. And overall this album is very extensive and has like good tone to it. Somebody tries to get into the Beatles, I would really recommend listening to the self-titled or the White Album, whatever you want to call it first. I like this one. I will come back to this. This is very nice. Funny enough, I went to a record store the other day and actually got this album without even knowing what's on it, because it was a double album and it was very cheap. And I have a friend who has the vinyl, so I was like, can't be that bad. So I got that. And I'm very happy that I got it now that I know the music. Good investment. Phase number 5, Yellow Submarine, 1996. This one is, I can keep really short. Yellow Submarine is more like the soundtrack to the animated movie I will talk about later. It's just 2 songs they already released. So Yellow Submarine, that was released 3 years earlier on Revolver, as well as All You Need Is Love, and then 4 new tracks, which really seem like scraps. They are fun though, very silly. For example, on one track, Lennon just starts barking at McCartney, which is funny. You can really feel the energy. And then the rest of the album is just soundtrack of the movie, so I don't really know It's nice. Phase number 6, Abbey Road, 1969. Here we are, Abbey Road. The cover itself is a staple in pop culture. I remember seeing this when I was very small, very tiny little guy. It's very memorable for me. So it kind of feels like coming full circle after reaching my age and then looking at the Beatles finally, trying to understand what makes them special and seeing this cover again and being like, oh, here we are now. I enjoyed it. I would describe this album as very balanced overall. We have ballad-like pieces. We have the songwriting ability talking about wacky characters. We have some songs to hype you up, some rock songs. It's a very nice mix. Overall, the project flows very well. For example, through transitions between golden slumbers, carry their weight, and the end on the back end of the project. I think this album has the best flow overall. I will come back to this one as well. And I realized that many songs that I listened to on this project already were in my rotation of listening to music. And here we are at the end, phase 7, Let It Be, 1970. When the album Let It Be was released in 1970, the band didn't even exist anymore. And it kind of feels like a farewell. I mean, the album is titled after the track Let It Be, which has a really farewell kind of character. And I mean, I know the history behind it because I looked at their biographies. I can't really say much to Let It Be. It's just like a good collection of songs. Nothing really stood out to me. It's just a good thing. It's just a good project. So now my take after listening to everything is basically that it was an experience I didn't have in a long time. Looking at artists, you could really see the way they evolved over time, which was nice. The first era, I don't really need that. It had some nice moments when you realize, oh, this is a cover. I listened to this before by someone else. And the Toxic songs were very funny as well. I gotta be honest. But seeing their trajectory start at experimental music in Revolver and Rubber Soul was very nice. Going crazy during the Sgt. Pepper's and Mystical era, and then kind of shaping rock the way we know it right now on the back end was very nice. I had fun. Was very extensive. Really felt like being with the Beatles and seeing how they evolve as musicians. What I can confidently say is that the songwriting is top notch. Even though some things you think they shouldn't work, they do work when they talk about their wacky characters, but you're still kind of invested. So if somebody's trying to improve their songwriting or is interested in songwriting overall, they should listen to the Beatles and they will find something to work with. Yeah, and overall it was a pleasant experience. I can understand how their catalog is one of the best. So as I mentioned earlier, the Beatles also made movies. When I talked about Yellow Submarine, for example, they made 5 movies in total, and they are connected to the albums. These were A Hard Day's Night, Hello, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Magical Mystery Tour, and Yellow Submarine. And Yellow Submarine was an animation movie. They didn't do it themselves, somebody else did it. And overall, they were the first band to do like advertising videos and music videos. So before that wasn't really a thing. And they started to use that part of media to kind of push their vision. I mean, now it's normal that you release a single and then you release a music video right afterwards. But that wasn't normal, so they kind of paved the way. The movies were critically acclaimed, except for Magical Mystery Tour, which was like improv. So much for the movie. So now I have some fun facts and backgrounds that help me understand the Beatles more and how they depicted themselves in the public during their active years. For example, in November 1962, the Beatles played in the Prince Wales Theatre in London, and Lennon said, "All you people on the cheap places, start clapping your hands. Hey, and all you people on the up there, all the rich people, just rattle your jewelry," or something. On March 5th, 1996, Lennon said in an interview, "Christianity will go, it will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I know I'm right and I will be proved right. We are more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity." And by this, a big outrage in the south of the US, who were big fans of the Beatles before, started to emerge, with people trying to ban the Beatles. Many radio stations stopped playing their music, their vinyls got burned, and like merchandise got destroyed. But honestly, they didn't really care, and their manager Epstein didn't really care that much. They saw it like as publicity. Every publicity is good publicity kind of thing. A couple months later, Lennon apologized, but you can look it up on YouTube. He didn't really care. He doesn't really take it back, honestly. He's just like, yeah, I didn't mean it that way. Chill out. But it will come back and have an impact on their future life, which we will see later. Around 1966, the Beatles decided to stop playing live shows because it was just too tiring. Beatlemania, so the whole hype around them got too big. They couldn't play properly because they couldn't hear themselves over all their fans screeching and screaming, so they just decided to stop playing live overall in 1966. In 1968, they founded Apple Corps Limited, which was their big company having many departments for media, music, fashion, all that. They even had a little boutique selling hippie clothing in London, but that wasn't really sustainable and had to close down after 8 months. And all the other media departments really didn't make money and weren't sustainable. In the end, only the music publishing part of the company prevailed. Who would have thought? In 1968, the Beatles took their friends and family to Rishikesh in the northern part of India to learn transcendental meditation. You can even visit their retreat now. They wrote a couple of songs for Abbey Road and the White Album here, but they had very different levels of enthusiasm for the whole thing. McCartney left after a couple of days to deal with Apple Corps Limited. Ringo Starr left shortly after, and Harrison and Lennon, they were really into it, so realizing that they had different views on life really led to them not being as close as they were before. But they brought transcendental meditation and that kind of way of life into the West and made it more popular. I mean, right now meditation and yoga, for example, are pretty normal in our society and recommended, and that wasn't the case before. They really brought it into the West. Not really a fun fact, but Lennon was a heroin addict from around the 1960s, mid-1960s to 1974, but then he detoxed and was clean until 1980. Yeah, that really helped me realize that these big stars and legends are just people. And I mean, for the most part, they are pretty fucked up, because it's kind of hard to deal with being so well known. Commercially speaking, they were the most successful band of all time. They sold over 1 billion units during the course of their music being published. That's just an estimate, honestly. 600 million for sure, but you never know. So we looked at the beginning, we looked at the music, we looked at some fun facts to understand them more, and now we look at the end of the band, because they only were together for 8 years, and how did that happen? So in August 1967, Brian Epstein, the fifth Beatle, their manager, who was a crucial part in their process, died. And later on, when asking the members, they said that that was kind of the beginning of the end. 2 years later, on January 13th, 1969, they played the last live concert atop the Apple Corps building. 8 months later, on September 20th, 1969, Lennon tells McCartney and Starr that he plans on leaving the band. In the following year, on April 10th, 1970, McCartney officially states in an interview that they are broken up. 10 years later, on December 8th, 1980, Lennon gets shot in New York City by a fan. What kind of fan is that, you think? Shooting their idol? Well, the guy who shot him was a very conservative Christian, and he didn't take the comments well with the Beatles being more popular than Jesus, and he thought that Lennon was kind of a hypocrite for having all this money, all this wealth, and their music being very hippie-like and love, peace, not really needing materialistic things to be happy. And the guy who shot him had a few screws loose, to be honest. He read a book where murder was romanticized, and after shooting Lennon, he just sat down and started reading the book and waited for the police. The guy's still incarcerated to this day. He tried to get out 12 times, but they didn't let him. Harrison died in 2001 of cancer, and Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney are still alive. That's the status quo right now. So let's come to my conclusion. Why should I care about the Beatles? Do I understand why the Beatles are so important in popular culture right now? Well, they were commercially successful and critically acclaimed, so they had crazy fans that shrieked whenever they saw them, and they had music critics liking their music. They always were on the latest fashion trends and helped them emerge. They were active in different kinds of media. Commercially speaking, they're the most successful band of all time. They experimented with their music. You can see their music change. They had some cultural impact. For example, looking at the transcendental meditation. One thing I didn't say earlier was that Lennon spent his honeymoon in bed with Yoko Ono, his wife, as a kind of protest, and told people to grow their hair and be against war. So they were a big part of the hippie movement that only grew and grew over time. I found them to be pretty relatable. Maybe not the whole taking heroin stuff, but overall they were just some guys from the UK wanting to make music and turning into these idols. They formed a generation and represented it at the same time. I can understand the Beatles better now, and I appreciate what they did more. and that's why you should care about the Beatles. As always, guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you like it, comment if you have any comments, subscribe if you like what I do. See you next week.